Hi everyone, welcome to a new episode of Pal2Pal. I'm Millie from Tecspal. Today we're talking about Colombia, one of the fastest growing nearshore hubs right now, and what the new labor reforms and 2026 minimum wage changes actually mean for companies hiring there. A lot is shifting, and if you're building teams in Colombia, this impacts your cost, contracts, and overall strategy. To break it down, I'm joined by Eric Tabone, founder of Nearshore Business Solution, who's been working in Colombia's hiring ecosystem for over a decade. Eric, so happy to have you here.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. And hey, everyone, glad to be here. And hopefully I could share some great information. And hopefully everybody could walk away from this a bit more educated and easier to make some good decisions.
Nice. Eric, let's zoom out for a second. These reforms are being called the biggest shift in years. At a high level, what's actually changing?
Yeah, so I mean, the biggest reform that's been going on recently is pretty much what's happening with the minimum salaries. Well, at the beginning of the year, Gustavo Petro, the president, pretty much pushed a raise through by decree and couldn't get approved by Congress, and he raised the minimum salary 23%, which is astronomical. So as soon as they do that, everything just starts to go in motion, start moving forward, which lots of effects, mostly negative, but there are a couple positives that came out of this that started to go into play. Where it starts to become a bit interesting is that the Supreme Court throws it down, then they try to bring it back, and so right now we're a bit in limbo on what's going to actually happen. But as of now, my team and I, my clients, are planning for just a 23% increase, 23.7% increase actually, and we just got to deal with it. That's where we are today.
And if you had to point out 2 or 3 things every US or European executive should really understand before hiring Colombia or Latam, what would they be?
Well, so there's a couple ways you could think of this. What I would suggest, I guess the first one I would kind of talk about is what happens or what's going on with this labor reform and how would this kind of impact. But then I would also talk about a few things that come outside of this. So, with this labor reform, what I tell all my clients is, number one, the minimum wage, this going up. Nobody is hiring at the minimum wage. That's, around $500 a month. So that's not going to have a direct impact. Where it might have an impact is obviously wages are increasing. So you might have to be a bit more competitive with your offer.
Leaders hear more regulations. They sometimes get nervous. But what's the real takeaway? Is Colombia still a smart bet?
Yeah, completely. Context about this. I work across Latin America. Obviously, I live and work in Colombia, so I'm based here, but I work across Latin America. And I always talk about Colombia. It's just a good, stable destination. What do I mean by that? From a cost perspective, it's not too expensive. It's not too cheap. From a talent perspective, this is a country of over 50 million people. Out of this 50 million, let's say you have half at working age who are looking for roles, and then you're going to work with another 5 to 10 million people who actually speak English. This is a massive market that you could pretty much do quite a bit and grow teams as you want. Yes, our president is a bit on the crazy side, and we never know what he's going to say on Twitter. But for the most part, still politically stable country. Safety, it's a safe country. Don't believe what Netflix says about Colombia. So yeah, it's just a good, stable option and one of several that I often look at across Latin America.
Nice. So let's talk about the 2026 minimum wage increase. How does this actually affect hiring budgets, especially for junior or mid-level roles? Any kind of effects?
Because of a concept they use here in Colombia, they call it an integral salary, which pretty much allows people to make 10 minimum salaries and has extra benefits. So obviously if the minimum salary goes up 23%, the integral salary also goes up 23%. This is where I see the opportunity that comes in. A lot of these people, their companies either change their contracts, so these people aren't happy, or they had to lay them off. And so what does that mean? Suddenly the market, there's a lot of talent, phenomenal talent out there looking for their next opportunity. So when I kind of look at this, I just look at both sides. What is the good and the bad? And we just take this and move forward.
Nice. I think it goes online with the next question. CFO or founder mindset. How can wage increases push companies to rethink retention, performance, and internal growth? Are there some strategies they can apply or take into account within their strategy?
Yeah, completely. So I think when you think about wage inflation and how that's moving, there is another element that is probably important to flag is the weakening dollar. So if a C-level executive is coming from the United States or even Europe that possibly is working the US dollar, current dollar doesn't go nearly as far as it once did. So I tell every single client, every executive, there's 2 things you got to keep in mind. Number one, you got to have these conversations before it becomes a problem. Because if you don't have that open and transparent conversation, your best talent could be looking to go for something. But if you have that, you can mitigate that before it becomes a risk. And then the second thing, one thing I see over and over again, and I have conversations with lots of people, 10, 20, 30 people on a weekly basis, that they want that quality of life. What I mean by that, they want that remote job. You know how it is living in Latin America and in Montevideo, here in Bogota. Traffic, if you're having to go into the office, you might spend an hour and a half just going one way. So little things that improve quality of life, allowing to work from home, paying fair and respectable wages, having that honest and transparent conversations when needed, that goes a long way, because oftentimes companies don't do that. And I think the companies who do take the lead on that are the ones that are well positioned to continue to build out and hire the best people in Colombia and across Latin America.
Totally. I totally agree. Election of quality of life and to enjoying your job is not only about the money, it's about the whole perspective.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
A lot of global companies hire remote talent in Colombia. What do the new rules around equipment and internet energy reimbursement mean in real life?
Yeah. Okay, that's a great question. So there's a couple things to take in mind. So the connectivity or the reimbursement, that often has to do more with if people are going to be on the lower ends. However, best practice is if you're going to be hiring people to work for your company, you should get them some type of equipment for them to use, so they don't have to be using their own laptop. So obviously it depends on how you hire, whether it's contractor, EOR, or entity, which there's a million ways we could look at that. At the end of the day, even if you're hiring somebody for, $50,000 a year, which is still a discount for a role that you might have to pay in the United States, you should still probably be providing them with some type of equipment for them to do their job. Send them a computer to do their job, is what I would say.
It's the least you can do.
So it's the least you could do. And it doesn't even cost that much, and that cost oftentimes for the company is nothing, but for the individual could make or break whether or not they're going to be successful in that role. Yeah,
and in terms of not only productivity but also security, it just doesn't make sense.
The best part is when I see people who bring a senior level account executive on, or creative, or developer, or whatever, and that person might have a computer that's 4 or 5 years old, and they spend more time waiting for things to load. And I just think about what is a productivity loss. It just doesn't add up. But yeah, 100%.
Perfect. And what's the most common compliance mistake you've seen when managing these distributed teams in Colombia?
So I think the biggest thing that people do have to remember is when you hire people, you have 3 options: either contractors, an employee through EOR, employer of record, or forming your own entity. So if you're going to hire somebody as a contractor, you have to remember you cannot specifically state very strict schedules. There's supposed to show that there's simple rules and compliance checks to ensure that there's going to be no employment misclassification. That is a risk. But I also tell people you just got to balance it out if you decide to hire them as a contractor. If you go with employer of record, awesome. Just make sure you check them out. Make sure the MSA, the terms make sense for your actual strategic level and what you want to do. And then the third thing on how people often are hired is through the entity. When you start an entity in a different country, whether it's Colombia or whatever country across Latin America, there's a lot of things you have to keep in mind. So that's where you do have to have a lawyer to make sure you're checking all the boxes, crossing those T's and dotting those I's. That's probably one of the biggest things I see, and that's a conversation I at least have on a daily basis on how to actually classify those people.
Perfect, nice. Yes, it's something to take into account, especially when you're growing not only in Colombia, but across Latin America or across the world. Which solution helps best?
Yeah, exactly.
And beyond legal compliance, what do Colombian professionals actually care about from employers? Higher pay, flexibility, stability. We talked a little bit about this, but it's interesting to hear first person from a Colombian. What do you feel employees value?
Yeah, so I speak with quite a few candidates a week. I don't work on the recruiting side anymore, but my team does. And so out of my team, I bet between my team, across the team, we speak with over 500 people a week, easily, if not more. Simple trends often come up. People are usually looking for a job for one of 3 reasons. One, because their current job sucks and they just want something different. But then that would either stem to either they probably want more money or they want a bit more flexibility. And that flexibility doesn't mean that they work 4 days a week. No, that flexibility means working from home. I work from home, but my commute from obviously to my home office, it's in my home, and that saves 2 or 3 hours a day. And especially Colombians and even more so if you're in a big city such as Bogota. I mean, that time's just completely invaluable. So understanding that, figure out what those market rates are, pay above those market rates, 10, 20% more, and give them the flexibility to manage their time and do their job. That often is one of the first steps to building up a kick-ass team that's going to get the job done. And at the same time, you're saving 50% compared to hiring in the United States or Europe.
For sure. And retention is also key today, because if you're higher and you're like having like a really big percentage of people leaving the company, and you have to onboard again and do the whole process, you're at the same time lose that
100%.
productivity and money.
Yeah, I mean, how much I sometimes think like if companies, these little things that paying 10, 20% more at the end of the day has a massive payoff. And if they don't, if companies are dealing with turnover, employees stay 1 year, 2 years or less, what does it cost to replace, cost to train? And it just doesn't make sense. But yeah.
Totally. And culturally, what do foreign leaders most often misunderstand when managing Colombian teams?
So, well, there's two things I would say about this. First and foremost, I always want to make this clear: Netflix has not done Colombia any favors. So everything that most people know about Colombia is probably wrong. What I mean by that, yeah, 40 years ago it was a very different place, but now, me living in Bogota, it's a global city. It's almost like I'm in London. It's safe, it's fine, it's developed, you could get around. And I think I always want to make sure that that's very clear moving forward. Because if you're going to hire Colombian teams, don't get on there and make jokes about a very horrible history 40, 50 years ago. But the number two, I also say, just remember, they're professionals. People in Colombia, they know what they're doing. And obviously it depends on what level you hire at. If you hire somebody with 2 to 4 years experience, you're not going to treat them the same as if you hire somebody with 15 to 20 years experience. These are global professionals. A lot of times they've worked with multinationals. They've grown up speaking in English, working with US clients. They know how to manage their workload. They know how to manage projects, stakeholders, and they know how to get the job done. So treat them just like you would as if they were in the US or Europe or wherever your headquarters are.
Perfect. Yes, totally. And to compare to Brazil, Mexico, or Chile, where does Colombia stand today as a hiring destination?
So I work across all of Latin America. Out of that, the 4 or 5 markets that tend to be most typical I work with is Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico. Those are the 4 main countries I probably do 95% of our placements with. I will throw Chile in there because you asked, and that sometimes comes up. All these markets have pros and cons to it. Brazil is an absolutely massive market. They're known for their client-facing roles, financial services, how do they manage consulting, and then, of course, developer roles that are a bit harder to find. Brazil is probably going to be one of the most expensive countries in Latin America. So if you're in the US hiring in Brazil, you're going to have a 30% cost savings as opposed to other countries. Mexico is the neighbor of the US. It's pretty easy to get back and forth. Once again, it's a huge country, great population. They really excel there with sales representatives, facing customer success account executives. One of our biggest clients is out of Mexico. And a lot of these people that we end up hiring, they grew up in the US or grew up going to the US quite frequently. So oftentimes you have no idea that you're dealing with people in Mexico. Just the way you don't even notice. I already spoke about Colombia, but just to kind of give a quick generalization, I mean, it's just a good middle of the road. Expensive, it's not too cheap. Colombia's probably going to be about 10% less than Mexico, about 20 to 30% less than Brazil, but certain roles, higher end developer roles, you may not find in Colombia, not because they don't have the capabilities to do it, but just because the educational system hasn't really brought that. So when I think about AI, LLM engineers, machine learning, you're going to be a bit more successful possibly in countries where they've developed that market just a bit more. So when I speak with C-levels, executives across US, Europe, wherever who want to come into Latin America, it's always important to understand a bit where your strategic priorities are, and then you start to build out that map and see what makes sense. I think Colombia is great, but it's not for every company out there. So it just depends on what you have to do with that.
Just hearing you, I clearly see the intelligent thing to do is to talk to someone that knows about the market and knows where they're going to find the talent you're looking for, depending on the role or their seniority.
Yeah, I always tell people like what we do, there's no rocket science to what we do, but we've done this a lot. And when you do something hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times a week, compounded over the past few years, I mean, my team and I, we've seen and done it all. And so that's kind of where I go back to. There's no rocket science to what we do, but it does make sense to have somebody or someone or some team or something to at least give general advice on what they're actually seeing in those markets and what's going on in the ground, as opposed to just, I don't know, Googling it or trying to find it on ChatGPT, because
Of course.
that doesn't always get you the right information.
Yeah, it's the same for us. Like, I feel like when we do logistics in, for example, Latin America, or even like in a pack, when you do something every day, you know which errors are going to appear, you know where you're going to get stuck, you know where you have to like be
Yeah,
attentive, or where you have to respond fast. So I feel like that expertise is what kind of companies like Nearshore
yeah,
or Tecspal can bring up
yeah.
to.
Can I? Well, now I have a question for you. For you all, what country is the easiest to execute logistics, the delivery, and what country is the most difficult?
We started, we specialized in LATAM.
Yeah.
Basically, it came from the fact that we were Latin American, so it was easy for us to understand how logistics worked here.
Right.
Besides, maybe like US companies, where you have like a description like you have to give out the computer on the blue door next to the church, and it wasn't as mapped out as it is in America, maybe. But today we already specialize in South America. We work really good in Argentina. We work really good in Colombia too, in Brazil and in Mexico. I feel like we have similar expertise because you do the hiring and then we equip them. And in the same line, as we work, we get better and we learn. So those maybe are the countries where we are fastest and more like easygoing. For example, a pack, it's really big and it's really different culturally, but things are like really speed up, and you
Yeah.
know people are like so good, also like straightforward in the work. It's
Very
nice
good.
to see also these companies like hiring all over the world
Yeah.
and giving opportunities, and also like having these multicultural teams. So we're basically here just to make that possible in the hard work.
Yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. Well, great.
Okay, Eric, thank you for breaking down in such a clear and practical way. For everyone listening, global hiring isn't static, markets evolve, policies change. What really makes a difference is understanding people, the local context, and thinking long term. This has been Pal2Pal, where we explore real strategies behind global work. Stay connected, stay global, and keep building strong borderless teams. Thank you so much, Eric. It was a pleasure to talk to you, to
You're
learn from
very.
you.
How it goes. If there's anything else I can help you all with, just let me know. I'm here for you.